Lights hit her mirror without warning, red and blue strobing through the dark, like something had gone wrong with the world. Sable Fontaine's hands didn't shake. That surprised her, even now. 8 years in the Canadian Armed Forces had taught her body to stay still when everything else was falling apart. And that reflex hadn't left her, even after the discharge papers, even after the surgery, even after the 18 months of learning to walk again in a way that didn't embarrass her. Her hands stayed flat on the wheel. She checked her mirrors. She pulled to the shoulder of Wellington Street and cut the engine. It was 11:43 at night. She'd just finished a double shift at the Ottawa General. Still in her scrubs, her badge clipped to her chest pocket, her left leg already stiffening the way it always did when she'd been on her feet too long. She'd been 2 kilometers from home. The officer took his time, watched him in the side mirror, unhurried, one hand resting near his belt. When he reached her window, he didn't crouch down to meet her eye level. He stood upright, looking down at her like she was something he needed to assess. License and registration. No greeting, no reason. Sable kept her voice even. They're in the glove box, reaching now. Her left hand moved slowly, deliberately, the way you learn to move when you've spent enough time in situations where a misread gesture changes everything. She found the documents and held them out. He took them without a word and studied her face like he was looking for a crack in something. You been drinking tonight? No. You sure about that? Yes. He tilted his head. You're favoring your left side. I have a service injury. Documented. Service injury. He repeated it like she'd said something foreign. You military? Former. 8 years, 2 PPCLI out of Shiloh. He looked at her scrubs, her badge, the hospital lanyard still around her neck. Something flickered across his face. Not recognition, not respect. More like recalculation. Sable's jaw tightened. Can I ask why you stopped me? Step out. There was the word. One that meant the conversation was already over on his end. That she was now a problem to be managed rather than a person to be spoken to. She opened the door and pulled herself out. The motion was slow. It was always slow now. The left leg rotating from the hip in that half-mechanical way her physiotherapist had spent 2 years teaching her. She gripped the doorframe. Officer Belcourt, she could read his nameplate now, watched her without offering his hand, without stepping back to give her room. He just watched, arms crossed, like her difficulty was evidence of something. You on medication? Prescription? Yes. What kind? That's a medical question. I'm asking. Sable inhaled slowly through her nose. I take a low-dose muscle relaxant for spasticity. I haven't taken it in over 6 hours. Unprepared. Belcourt walked past her without answering and opened her passenger door. She heard him going through the center console, then the back seat. She kept her hands visible and her eyes forward and didn't say anything. What's this bag? My work bag. I'm a nurse. He pulled it out anyway. She heard the zipper, the soft clatter of medical supplies being moved aside, then a pause, and these. He held up the prescription bottles she kept in the side pocket. 3 of them, labeled Current. Her name on every one. Those are prescribed to me, she said. You can read the labels. I am reading them. He set them on the hood of her car like they were exhibits. That's a significant quantity of controlled medication. One of them is controlled. The others are not. And I'm a medical professional with a documented service injury. If you'd like to call my physician, I don't need to call anyone. He came around to face, walk a straight line for me. The cold settled into her chest. I can't do that, she said carefully. You can't. Not because of impairment, because my left leg has permanent nerve damage from a shrapnel injury sustained in Kandahar in 2019. Walking a straight line on command is not something my body does reliably, and it has nothing to do with alcohol or medication. Belcourt looked at her for a long moment. His face gave nothing away. Line, or I'm taking you in. A car slowed on the other side of Wellington. She caught the pale light of a phone screen through the window. Someone recording. Sable's hand moved to her jacket pocket before she decided to let it. Slowly, visibly, she pulled out her phone. I'm making a call, she said. Put that away. I have the right to contact. I said, put it down. She didn't. She unlocked the screen. Opened a contact near the top. Not a lawyer, older than that. Belcourt stepped forward. Ma'am, she pressed call. It rang once. Fontaine. The voice on the other end was calm, clipped, military precise even at 1:45 midnight. I need you, she said. Wellington and Bronson. pause of maybe 2 seconds. How many? 1. So far. Stand by. She lowered the phone. Belcourt grabbed for it and she pulled back, slipping it into her pocket. Who did you just call? His voice had changed texture, harder now, something grinding underneath it. Sable didn't answer. The sound started about 90 seconds later. Engines, low and steady, coming from the north. No sirens. No lights at first, then blue and red, federal, not municipal. A different kind of authority altogether. 2 unmarked SUVs rolled to a stop in a staggered formation behind Belcourt's cruiser. Doors opened with that particular quiet precision that comes from people who've practiced it. 4 people in dark tactical clothing, no visible insignia. One of them walked directly toward Belcourt. He was mid-50s, silver at the temples, the kind of face that had been still for so long it had set that way permanently. Officer. He didn't raise his voice. Step away from the vehicle. Belcourt's hand went to his radio. Who the hell are? The man reached into his jacket. A badge, federal. Canadian Forces National Investigation Service. Step back. Belcourt took 1 step, then another. His face had gone the color of old concrete. The agent walked past him without looking at him again and stopped in front of Sable. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Warrant Officer Fontaine, I'm a civilian now, she said. Old habits. The corner of his mouth didn't quite move. Are you all right? I've been better. We'll take it from here. He turned and spoke quietly to one of the other agents, who moved toward Belcourt with a tablet already open, reading something from the screen in a low, even voice. Sable heard fragments. Unlawful detention. Harassment of a protected veteran. Section 268 of the Criminal Code. She picked up her prescription bottles from the hood of her car, put them back in her medical bag, and got into the driver's seat. In the side mirror, she watched Belcourt standing beside his cruiser looking smaller than he had 60 seconds ago. One of the agents was removing his body camera from its mount with practiced efficiency. Sable started the engine and drove away. She didn't cry until she was inside her apartment with the door locked behind her. Not from fear. From the specific exhaustion of having to be composed for so long in a situation where no one was offering her the same courtesy. She stood at the kitchen sink with the water running cold over her wrists and looked at her reflection in the dark window above it. Same face, same tired eyes, same person who'd left for her shift that morning, thinking the hardest part of the day would be explaining to a patient why his discharge had been delayed again. Her phone had 17 notifications by the time she checked it. Cow workers who'd seen something on Twitter. A text from her sister in Saskatoon. 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She turned the phone face down and went to bed. She didn't sleep. By morning, the video was everywhere. The person who'd been driving past on Wellington had caught most of it. Belcourt going through her bag, the pill bottles on the hood, Sable standing with her hands visible while he circled her car like he was deciding something. The federal vehicles arriving. The look on Belcourt's face when the badge came out. The headline that got the most traction was blunt. Federal agents intervene as OPS officer harasses disabled vet nurse during traffic stop. Sable's phone didn't stop. She silenced it and drove to the CFNIS office. The building was in Vanier, unremarkable from the outside gray brick and a parking lot with no signage worth mentioning. She told the receptionist her name and waited. 3 minutes later, a woman appeared in the hallway. Or she was 30-some dark hair, a face that processed information visibly and quickly. She extended a hand. Inspector Audrey Chabral. Thanks for coming in, Sergeant Fontaine. I haven't been a sergeant in 4 years. Right. Chabral's mouth moved briefly. Old file habit. Come on through. She led Sable down a corridor to a conference room with a recorder on the table and a printout of the video screen-grabbed into several stills. I've already reviewed Officer Belcourt's dash cam, Chabral said, settling into the chair across from her. And the Wellington footage. What I need from you is the account in your own words, Sable told her. All of it. The stop with no explanation, the bag, the pill bottles on the hood, the field sobriety test she physically couldn't pass. Chabral didn't interrupt. She listened in that particular way that meant she was also filing things into categories. When Sable finished, Chabral set down her pen. How long have you had the mobility issues? Since the surgery in 2020. Nerve grafting partial success. The left leg doesn't respond predictably under stress or fatigue. And Belcourt was informed of this multiple times. Did he make any comments about your service record? Sable paused. He said it didn't look like I'd served. Chabrol's expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened slightly. It's noted. She pulled the tablet forward. Officer Belcourt has been with OPS for 7 years. No sustained complaints on file. On file, Sable said. Chabrol looked at her. Yes, exactly that phrase. Sable sat back. What happens now? Now we start building the case. There are at least 4 federal statutes touched by last night's stop, and that's before we start pulling his full service history. Well, he's been suspended pending investigation as of this morning. That fast. You called us, Chabrol said simply. When CFN's ICE is involved, things move. There was a knock on the door. The older agent from the night before poked his head in. Chabrol, internal review just flagged something. You'll want to see it. She stood. Give me 2 minutes, she said to Sable, and followed him out. Sable sat with the recorder running and looked at the stills on the table. In one of them, Belcourt was holding her prescription bottles up to the streetlight. In another, she was standing with her hands flat on the hood of her own car, and the look on her face was the same look she'd learned to wear in situations where you had to appear calm while everything around you was being calculated. She knew that look. She'd worn it in Kandahar. She'd worn it in the field hospital. She'd worn it for 18 months of rehabilitation appointments, where people talked about her body like it was a project that hadn't resolved the way they'd hoped. She was tired of wearing it. Chabrol came back with a file folder under her arm and a change in her posture that Savol recognized as someone preparing to deliver information that was about to make the situation more complicated. Change of plans, Chabrol said. We need you to come with us. Where? Elgin Street, the OPS main building. She paused. There's something you should see. You don't have to go inside. You don't have to speak to anyone, but I think you'll want to be there. Sable stood. Fine. The news vans were already parked outside when they arrived. 3 of them, cameras set up, reporters doing their earpiece adjustments. A group had gathered on the sidewalk with hand-lettered signs. Sable caught the words accountability and protect our veterans before Chabrol drove them around to the service entrance. Inside, through a one-way mirror, Sable watched Belcourt sit at an interrogation table in civilian clothes. His hands folded, his face pale. Across from him, a woman in a gray suit was explaining the charges with the slow, measured delivery of someone who had done this many times and felt no need to rush. Belcourt said, I was doing my job. The woman said, your job doesn't include unlawful detention. He said, she was acting suspicious. She said, she was driving home from a 12-hour nursing shift. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I didn't know that. You didn't ask. Sable watched his shoulders drop by degrees, the architecture of his certainty coming apart in real time. He looked, she thought, like a man who had never once considered that the thing he'd been most confident about might be the thing that undid him. When the investigator stood to leave, Chabrol touched Sable's arm lightly. Satisfied? Sable didn't answer immediately. She was still watching Belcourt's hands, the way they'd uncurled and lay flat on the table now, like he'd let go of something he'd been holding on to without realizing it. What happens to him? She asked. Arraignment in 72 hours. Federal charges take precedence. If he's convicted, minimum 18 months, likely more. Sable turned away from the glass. Can I go? Yeah. Chabrol walked her out through the service exit back to the car, away from the cameras. We'll be in touch. She made it halfway to her car before her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. Sable Fontaine? Who's asking? My name is Martin Okafor. Well, I'm a duty counsel with the Ottawa Public Defender's Office. I've been retained to represent Officer Belcourt. He spoke quickly, like he'd already anticipated her cutting him off. I'm not calling to pressure you. I just need you to hear something. I don't think you do. He has 2 daughters. His wife is on medical leave. He knows he made a mistake. He didn't make a mistake, Sable said. He made a choice. Well, he made it 7 times in a row while I told him exactly why what he was asking was impossible, and he made it anyway. Those aren't the same thing. I understand you're angry. I'm not angry. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. I'm certain. There's a difference. She ended the call, sat in her car for 3 minutes without starting the engine. 2 daughters. A wife on medical leave. She thought about that. Then she started the car and drove home, and she made herself stop thinking about it. It didn't work. She was back at Chabrol's office the next morning when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring out. The same number called again. Then a third time, and something about the persistence made her answer. Mrs. Fontaine, a woman's voice, low and careful. My name is Yasmin Traoré. I don't know if you remember, but 3 years ago I filed a complaint against Officer Belcourt. I said he searched my car without cause, that he said things. Her voice caught. They told me the evidence wasn't sufficient. They told me it would be better for everyone if I moved on. I have a work permit. I was scared. Sable sat very still. I saw what happened to you, Yasmin said. I saw your name in the news. I thought, if someone finally got through, if someone finally made them listen, then maybe my voice isn't useless after all. It's not. I want to testify. Sable exhaled slowly. I'm going to give you a number. Inspector Chabrol at CFNIS. Call her directly and tell her I sent you. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're the one taking the risk. She forwarded Yasmin's information to Chabrol and sat in the parking lot for a while, feeling the weight of what had just shifted. Lighter, exactly. More like the weight had redistributed itself into something she could carry at a different angle. But nothing stayed simple for long. 2 days later, Chabrol called at 6 in the morning. Belcourt's counsel filed a counter-complaint last night. Sable set down her coffee. What kind? They're alleging you were verbally aggressive during the stop, non-compliant with lawful commands, that you used threatening language. The silence on the line stretched. That's not what happened, Sable said. I know, but it's filed, and now we have to respond to it. They're also claiming the federal intervention was disproportionate, that you orchestrated the call to create a spectacle. I called a former commanding officer because I was being detained without cause. I know that too. Chabrol's voice was steady. I need everything you have from that night. VA documents, discharge records, the call log, proves your timeline. Sable spent the morning going through files she'd hoped not to need, medical records. The DVA correspondence from 2021. The phone log with the timestamp of her call at 11:46. She brought it all to Chabrol's office and spread it across the conference table. Chabrol photographed each document methodically. We're also pulling Belcourt's full history, she said without looking up. Stop he's logged in the last 7 years. What are you expecting to find? What we always find when someone starts looking. She set the phone down. A pattern. She was right. It took 4 days. When Chabrol called Sable back to the office, the conference table was covered in printouts arranged in rough chronological order. 8 files, 8 complaints, all dismissed, all involving people who, for various reasons, had decided the fight wasn't worth continuing. A woman from Vanier who'd withdrawn her complaint after someone called her employer. A Somali-Canadian man whose charges had quietly disappeared 2 weeks after he stopped responding to follow-up calls. A truck driver from New Brunswick who'd been told his dashcam footage was inadmissible on a technicality. He's done this before, Sable said. Multiple times. Chabrol was standing with her arms crossed, looking at the wall of paper like it was a structure she was still studying for weakness. The department didn't look, because none of the complaints made it far enough to trigger a pattern review, and the union protected him. Or at least made sure nothing stuck. She looked at Sable. We're reaching out to all 8. If 3 of them agree to testify, Belcourt's defense collapses. He's not a decent officer who had a bad night. He's a repeat offender who finally stopped someone with the means and the connections to push back. Sable looked at the 8 faces in the photos, young, mostly. Tired looking in that specific way of people who have learned not to expect too much from institutions. And if they won't testify? Chabrol's expression didn't change. Then we work with what we have, which is still significant. But Fontaine, I want you to understand something. Even with all of this, nothing is guaranteed. Bodycam footage is our strongest piece, and Belcourt's counsel is already filing a motion to have it suppressed. How? Arguing the seizure fell outside the CFNIS warrant parameters. The judge could agree. Sable sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. So, we might lose our best evidence. It's possible. And the counter-complaint? Still standing. We'll respond to it, but until we do, it's out there. Police union released a statement this morning. Chabrol slid a printout across the table. They're describing you as a disgruntled veteran looking to leverage a perceived slight into a civil suit. Sable, read it. Read it again. They know this is being recorded, she said. They don't care. Because if they make you look unstable enough, the public stops listening to you, and everything else we've built stops mattering. Sable set the paper down. What do I do? You let us work. Cabral held her gaze. You don't go to the press. You don't respond to the union. You don't get on social media. You trust the process. The process buried 8 complaints. I know. Cabral didn't flinch. But this time, CFNIS is the process. And we're not burying anything. That night, Sable sat in her apartment with the TV on mute and her phone in her hand and scrolled through 3 minutes of Twitter before she made herself stop. Hashtag supporting Belcourt had raised $60,000 for his legal fund. Someone had found a photo of his daughters at a school event and posted it. She turned her phone off and sat in the dark. Her leg ached with the particular deep bone quality that meant she'd pushed it too far, and it was going to remind her about it for days. She took her medication, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought about Yasmin Traoré, who had made one phone call because she saw Sable's name in the news and decided that meant something. She thought about the truck driver from New Brunswick, who'd lost a dashcam video to a technicality. She thought about the woman from Vanier who'd gotten a call at work. She turned her phone back on. The notification that stopped her wasn't a threat. It was a text from a number she'd saved as Belcourt Counsel Okafor. It read, "My client would like to issue a personal statement. He's asking if you'd be willing to speak with him before the arraignment." She stared at it. Then she screenshotted it, forwarded it to Cabral with the message, "Your call," and went to sleep. Chabral's response came at 6:45 the next morning. "Don't engage. Let us handle it." The hearing was held in a courtroom on Elgin Street that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. Sable sat in the gallery with Cabral beside her and watched 2 lawyers argue over whether a body camera worn in the course of official duties constituted private property. Belcourt's counsel was articulate and prepared. He used phrases like chain of evidence protocol and extraterritorial jurisdiction and made them sound reasonable. The prosecutor was quieter but more specific, citing 3 precedents in the last decade where similar footage had been admitted without question. The judge, a woman in her mid-60s with reading glasses on a chain and a face that revealed nothing, said she'd consider the motion overnight and dismissed the room. In the parking lot afterward, Sable asked, "What are our chances?" Cabral said, "Better than even, or rather not bet on better than even." 2 things happened in the next 48 hours. The first was that Yasmin Traoré came into the office and gave her full statement. She was composed and precise, and the only time her voice broke was when she described calling her immigration lawyer after the original complaint had been dismissed, trying to understand what she'd done wrong. The second was that a man outside the courthouse stepped into Sable's path and introduced himself as the OPS union's community liaison. "You should think about what you're doing," he said. "You came out of this hole." He didn't. He came out of 8 stops. The people he stopped didn't. Those complaints were, "I know what they were," she said. "I know exactly what they were, and so do you. Why you're standing here instead of in the courtroom." He started to say something else. She walked around him. The judge ruled 2 days later. The body camera footage was admissible. When Cabral called with the news, Sable was in the middle of a shift at Ottawa General and stepped into a supply closet to take it. "So we're back in," she said. "We're back in," Cabral confirmed. "And Fontaine, Traoré isn't the only one who's come forward. We have 2 more." Sable leaned against the shelving, surrounded by gauze and IV bags, and let herself breathe for a moment. "When's the trial?" 3 weeks. "Okay. Are you ready?" She thought about it honestly. About the months of this, the counter-complaint and the union statement, and the Twitter hashtag, and the night she'd driven 40 minutes out of the city and sat in a parking lot, trying to decide if any of it was worth it. "Yeah," she said. "Ready." She went back to her shift. The trial lasted 6 days. Sable testified for 4 hours across 2 sessions. She walked the court through the stop in detail, the escalation, the field sobriety test she could not physically pass, the 8 previous complaints, the moment she made the call, and what she knew when she made it. The prosecutor asked, near the end of the second session, "Sergeant Fontaine? Civilian? Ms. Fontaine?" A brief pause. When Officer Belcourt told you to walk a line you couldn't walk, you had the option to attempt it and fail or to refuse. Either way, the outcome for you was likely the same. Detention, charges. Why did you call instead of simply complying? Sable looked at the jury. 12 faces, varying expressions, most of them careful. Because complying would have given him what he wanted, she said. Not just from me. From the next person he stopped, and the one after that. He'd done this 8 times and nothing had stuck. I had something the other 8 didn't. I had someone I could call. And I decided that was not something I was willing to waste. Even knowing the risk, especially knowing the risk. The jury convicted on all counts. 37 months, with the possibility of additional civil liability pending the review of the 8 dismissed complaints. Outside the courthouse, reporters circled, stopped on the steps, and said what she'd decided to say, simply. I'm not telling this story because it's exceptional. I'm telling it because it shouldn't be exceptional. People are stopped every day by officers like Belcourt, and most of them don't have a contact in federal investigation. Most of them have to make a choice between fighting a system that was designed to outlast them or protecting themselves by walking away. I walked away from that choice. The next person has an easier time making it. One reporter called out, "What would you say to the 8 people who filed complaints before you?" Sable paused. That they weren't wrong to try, and they weren't weak for stopping. The system made it impossible, and that's on the system, not on them. She walked to the edge of the steps. Chabrol was waiting by the car. "Well done," Chabrol said, which coming from her sounded like a significant statement. First domino was the OPS complaint review, which reopened all 8 files. The second was the police union's decision to quietly distance itself from Belcourt's legal defense once the extent of the pattern became public. The third was a letter from the Ottawa City Council announcing an independent review of complaint tracking procedures. None of it felt like victory in the way she'd once imagined victory feeling. Quieter than that, and more specific, and more like the beginning of something difficult than the end of something clean. 6 weeks after the verdict, Yasmin Traoré called her. "I've been asked to speak at a community forum," Yasmin said. "About what happened, about coming forward. I'm not sure I can do it alone." "You won't have to," Sable said. They sat together on a stage in a community center in Vanier, in front of a room with more people in it than the building was probably supposed to hold. Sable spoke first, then Yasmin, then a third woman who hadn't spoken publicly before. A man in the back asked how someone without federal connections was supposed to fight a complaint that kept getting buried. Sable thought about that for a moment before she answered. "You find other people who've been through the same thing," she said, "and you keep talking to each other until the system can't ignore you anymore." That's not a perfect answer, but it's the one that actually works. It wasn't an ending. She knew that. There were still files open, still cases where the outcome wasn't clear, still nights when she lay awake and thought about Belcourt's daughters and wondered whether that kind of reckoning ever resolved cleanly into something she could call peace. But she kept going, because the alternative was to let what happened to her become just another buried complaint in a file that nobody opened. She'd decided, somewhere on the shoulder of Wellington Street with her hands on the hood of her own car, that she was not willing to be that. She went to work the next morning, and the morning after that, and somewhere in the accumulated weight of ordinary days, the fight became less like survival and more like purpose, which was, she supposed, how most of the important things in life eventually shifted, if you refused to let go of them long enough to find out.